Have you ever stopped to think about how insurance companies even work? I mean, really think about it. Their entire business is promising to pay for future disasters, hurricanes, pandemics, or even just you living to be 105. These are things that are, by their very nature, unpredictable. So how on earth can they make these promises and not just survive, but actually build massive businesses around them?
Well, it all boils down to this one single question, which is way more complicated than it sounds. How do you price a promise? How do you put a dollar amount today on a commitment to pay for something that might happen at some totally random time in the future for a completely unknown cost? That's what we're going to break down.
So, before we can get to the answers, we really need to understand the problem. We need a framework for thinking about the sheer scale of the challenge that these actuaries and insurers are trying to solve every single day.
And this, right here, is their playbook. It's called the Actuarial Control Cycle. You can think of it as a never-ending loop. First, you analyze all the potential risks. Then you quantify what those risks could actually cost. Next, you figure out a way to manage them, through pricing and product design. And finally, you monitor the results constantly to see if you were right. And that data feeds right back into the beginning of the cycle. It never stops.
And this is exactly why that cycle is so crucial. Just look at the challenges they're up against. They have to estimate the financial fallout of things that haven't happened yet. And we're not talking about next quarter. Their time horizon is decades long. The timing, the amount, it's all a massive question mark. And on top of all that, they have to juggle the needs of everyone, customers, shareholders, regulators. It's a tough balancing act.
Okay, so with that framework in mind, the very first step in this whole process is to try and tame that financial chaos. You have to somehow build a single cohesive picture of all the different risks a company is facing at once. And that really is the core question of risk aggregation. Think about it. An insurer is dealing with market crashes, huge storms, and the simple fact that people are living longer than ever. You can't just add those things up like you're adding groceries. They're totally different types of risk. So you need a way to combine them to see your total overall exposure.
To do that, we first have to split risks into two big categories. On one hand, you have what's called diversifiable risk. This is your classic, don't put all your eggs in one basket situation. If one company you're invested in goes under, it's not great, but it won't sink your whole portfolio. But then there's systematic risk. That's the storm that hits all the baskets. Think of a major recession. It affects almost everyone, and there's really no hiding from it.
And here's where it gets really dicey. This quote gets to the heart of the danger. You might think all your different risks are spread out and unrelated, but what this tells us is that during a real crisis, everything can start moving in the same direction at once. All those assets you thought were independent suddenly start falling together. Your diversification can fail you at the exact moment you need it the most.
So how do actuaries try to model this? Well, you can see there's a major trade-off. The correlation matrix approach is pretty simple and fast, but it relies on assumptions about how risks relate to each other. And as we just saw, those assumptions can break down. On the other end of the spectrum, you have stochastic modeling. This is way more powerful. It runs thousands or even millions of simulations to see a full range of possible futures. The catch? It's incredibly complex and needs a ton of data and serious computing power.
Okay, so we've managed to aggregate the risks. We have a clearer picture of the potential financial chaos. Now we get to the absolute heart of the matter. How do you actually turn that picture into a price for a product?
It is so tempting to think that pricing is just a pure math problem, but it's really not. It's this constant, delicate balancing act. The price has to be high enough to make a profit, of course, but it also has to be low enough to compete in the market. And it has to satisfy the regulators, all while being a product that people actually understand and want to buy. It's a real strategic puzzle.
So this is what the process actually looks like. First, you have to set your assumptions. Basically, your best guess about the future. What will claim rates be? What will your investments return? Then you build a complex model to project all the money coming in and going out based on those assumptions. Step 3, you calculate the actual premium you need to charge to hit your targets. And finally, and this part is absolutely critical, you stress test the whole thing. You run what are called sensitivity analyses to see what happens to your profit if your assumptions turn out to be wrong.
But here's the thing. The premium you pay for a policy, that isn't the only money an insurer needs to have. There's another enormous piece of this puzzle. A giant financial safety net that is actually required by law.
It's called the Solvency Capital Requirement, or SCR for short. And you can think of it like a massive financial shock absorber. It's a huge reserve of capital that the company has to keep on hand, totally separate from the money for everyday claims, for one reason: to make sure it can survive a really, really bad year.
So how bad is really bad? Well, the SCR is designed to withstand a catastrophic event with a 99.5% level of confidence. To put that in perspective, that means the insurer must hold enough capital to survive a financial hit so severe it would only be expected to happen once every 200 years. That is the ultimate guarantee that they can keep their promises even when everything goes wrong.
Now, this whole setup creates a really fascinating counterintuitive situation. You'd think that selling more policies is always good for business, right? Well, not exactly. At least not in the short term. It's called new business strain. When an insurer sells a brand new policy, the upfront costs, like commissions, and especially setting aside that huge 1 in 200-year capital requirement, are often way more than the first premium payment they get. This means that growing too fast can actually create a short-term loss on the books.
Okay, we've talked about risk, we've talked about pricing, and we've talked about this massive regulatory safety net. So let's tie it all together and see how this actually works as a complete system.
You see, it's not a straight line. It's a circle. It's one big, continuous feedback loop. That big picture of aggregated risk, that feeds directly into the assumptions used in the pricing models. And the price that comes out of those models has to be enough to cover everything: claims, expenses, profit, and the cost of funding that enormous capital safety net. Every single piece is connected to every other piece.
The entire system we've just walked through is built on one fundamental idea: using data from the past to make educated guesses about the future. But what happens when the future starts to look nothing like the past? With risks like climate change, cyber warfare, and global pandemics becoming more intense and unpredictable, the old assumptions are being seriously challenged. And that leaves us with a huge question. In a world that feels more chaotic than ever, how does this incredible balancing act have to evolve to keep its promises?